So, the mask finally slips. The grand performance, rehearsed over countless days, nights, and years, is at last complete. The disguise you wore so convincingly, the legendary role you played with such precision, has now been dropped. The curtain has fallen, and the theater of illusion you once upheld with tireless discipline no longer binds you. You step forward, not timidly, but with a calm authority. Out of the shadows you so carefully constructed, shadows that became both your camouflage and your prison. You are tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of dimming your brilliance, just so others could feel like the brightest stars in the room. Do you remember the weight of it? The exhaustion of clipping your own wings so their feathers could appear fuller. The weariness of stumbling over words you knew like scripture. Of fumbling sentences you could have delivered with eloquence and power. You knew the answers long before the questions were even asked. Yet you forced yourself into silence, swallowing the fire burning on your tongue. You pretended not to know, pretended to stumble, pretended to be less. All of it was theater, an act performed not for applause but for strategy. And they believed it. They believed they were watching authenticity, when in truth, every gesture, every pause, every misplaced word was choreographed with the precision of a master actor playing the role of a lifetime. They believed themselves to be the main characters. Oh, how convinced they were that the story revolved around them. Their decisions, their brilliance, their triumphs. They strutted across the stage, basking in the spotlight, intoxicated by their own illusion of importance. Yet all the while, they never realized you were the architect of the play itself. They were players reading lines, but you were the playwright, the director, the beautiful, calculating mastermind behind the longest running con in history. And let it be clear, this was never deception for cheap gain. This was not trickery born from malice or manipulation for shallow victories. No, this was endurance, a sacred act of patience, a strategic silence that required more strength than their loudest boasts ever could. You had one purpose: to gather, to learn, to observe. You allowed yourself to fade into the background so that their truest selves would emerge. You knew that revelation is never in what people say when they know they are being watched, but in what they do when they think no one is paying attention. While they laughed at your stumbles, you were mapping the terrain of the battlefield. Every room you entered, you noted the exits. Every conversation, you identified the cracks in their armor. Every strategy they flaunted, you examined for weaknesses. They thought you were fumbling to keep up, but in truth, your mind was moving like lightning, quick, sharp, untouchable. You were not behind. You were 3 moves ahead even as you pretended to be lost. Still, they labeled you. They put you in a box with neat little words, as small-minded people often do when confronted with something they cannot truly comprehend. They called you Namvi. They whispered that you were slow. They categorized you as the one who just didn't get it. The harmless one, the expendable one, the background character in their grand narrative. You were, to them, forgettable, disposable, and in their arrogance, they grew careless. They laughed in private at your questions, never realizing those questions were not born of confusion, but of calculation. They sighed when you asked them to explain something. Again, never realizing you were testing their consistency, pressing on their confidence, watching for the moment their mask would slip. To them, you were nothing more than furniture in the room, scenery in the backdrop of their drama. They spoke freely in your presence, convinced you were too dim to decode the language of power, the undertones of strategy, the unspoken motives behind their words. But you were always decoding, always watching, always writing mental notes in the invisible notebook of your mind. What they mistook for ignorance was in fact the art of surveillance. What they mistook for incompetence was the sharpest form of restraint. They never realized that in making you invisible, They handed you the greatest power access. They never realized that in discarding you, they cleared the path for you to see everything, to hear everything, to understand everything without ever being perceived as a threat. And now, the mask has slipped. But every mispronounced word was a deliberate choice. Every confused smile was not a sign of incompetence, but a carefully executed tactic, a mask you wore with flawless precision. And every, "I don't know," that left your lips was never an admission of ignorance. It was a weaponized silence, a refusal to reveal your depth, a conscious decision to withhold information and preserve your cover. They mistook hesitation for weakness, when in reality it was calculation. They never understood the truth, that you already knew everything, that you saw everything, and that you were already 3 moves ahead of them, before they even realized the game had begun. You were not a pawn stumbling across the board. You were the unseen hand moving the pieces. While they mocked your supposed slowness, you were orchestrating a strategy so intricate that they couldn't have comprehended it, even if you had spelled it out to them. The great miscalculation, let me pull back the curtain on what was truly happening in those endless meetings, those suffocating conversations where they spoke to you, as if you were a child learning to walk. They believed they were indulging you, correcting you, guiding you. But you were never the student in that room. You were the observer, the recorder, the quiet scientist in the lab, dissecting the anatomy of their arrogance. You weren't confused, and you certainly weren't falling behind. No, you were gathering intelligence. You were archiving. Every word they uttered, every shift in tone, every nervous glance across the table was cataloged in real time and stored in your internal database with ruthless precision. You filed away their contradictions like a seasoned prosecutor building a case. While they thought your questions exposed a lack of understanding, you were in fact exposing them to themselves. While they laughed at your supposed stupidity, you were quietly sketching the outlines of their greatest insecurities. While they rolled their eyes at your need for clarification, you were memorizing their tells, the subtle twitch of the lip when they lied, the tightening of the jaw when they were threatened, the shuffling of papers when they needed to buy time. You saw through their masks, even as they thought you had none of your own. Each condescending sigh became more than an annoyance. It was an entry in the psychological profile you built for them, a living document of their fragility. Each patronizing smirk was more than an insult. It was another data point revealing how desperately they needed to feel superior. Every so-called helpful correction was less about truth and more about dominance, and you logged it all, sharpening it into a weapon you would one day wield without mercy. They believed they were mocking you, that their laughter echoed at your expense. But in truth, their mockery was a training ground. They were rehearsing their own downfall without even knowing it. With every insult, they taught you the shape of their ego. With every careless word, they handed you the keys to their kingdom. They gave you their blueprint freely, blind to the price of their arrogance. Your silence was never ignorance. It was surveillance. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, the silence of someone who knows and chooses not to reveal. Your questions were not weakness. They were interrogation techniques, so masterfully subtle that not one of them realized they were being cross-examined. You weren't stumbling through the dark. You were testing them. You were probing their knowledge, measuring the thickness of their armor, looking for the holes. And the holes were always there, because more often than not, the truth was simple: they didn't actually know. They only performed knowledge. They only cosplayed intelligence. Their confidence was an act, their bravado a costume stitched together by insecurity. They mistook memorization for mastery. They mistook loudness for leadership. They mistook cruelty for cleverness. And all the while you stood quietly among them, the very embodiment of intelligence they pretended to possess. That was their greatest miscalculation, thinking that power lies in being the loudest in the room, when in fact it belongs to the one who listens the closest. They thought knowledge was measured by who spoke first, when in reality it is revealed by who waits the longest. They thought you were invisible, irrelevant, expendable. They never realized invisibility was your greatest shield, that irrelevance was your sharpest disguise, that expendability was the very cloak that made you indispensable. And so, without knowing it, they crowned you as the most dangerous one among them. Not because you fought for attention, but because you mastered the art of watching, of remembering, of waiting. The costume party is now over. The superpower of underestimation, the true genius, lies not in being the loudest voice in the room, nor in forcing brilliance into the spotlight. No, the true genius lies in the quiet beauty of being underestimated. It is a superpower unlike any other, because no one ever believes you possess it. It is the armor of invisibility, the cloak that hides your strength in plain sight. And because of this cloak, they gave you everything. Access to their words, access to their secrets, access to their unguarded selves. After all, why would anyone worry about the village idiot? Why would anyone bother locking the doors when, in their eyes, the fool was the only one standing in the hallway? Why cover the tracks of deceit when the slow one could barely follow the simplest of directions? This was the foundation of your plan. This was the beauty of your invisibility. And it worked, precisely as you knew it would. Every time they said, "Don't worry about it," you wouldn't understand anyway. You simply nodded, eyes lowered, lips curled into a polite smile. You said nothing. You let them believe the narrative they had written for you. But inside, you filed it away like a precious artifact, carefully cataloged in the archives of your mind. Every time they slowed their speech and explained a complex idea for your small brain, you leaned in, feigned confusion, and let them feel powerful. You let them bask in the illusion that they were teaching you, molding you, leading you. They thought they were mentors guiding the poor, lost one. They thought they were being generous, charitable, magnanimous. They thought they were building you up. But you knew better. Every explanation they offered was not instruction. It was confession. Each word they dumbed down was not a lesson for you, but a revelation of themselves. For when people believe they are speaking to someone beneath them, they expose the very truths they would guard around equals. Their simplifications betrayed what they thought was essential. Their omissions betrayed what they desperately wanted to hide. And you, the so-called fool, were not learning from them. You were studying them. Studying them like specimens pinned beneath the glass of your microscope, observing their movements, their patterns, their flaws. And the irony, it is almost divine. They believed they were lifting you up when in reality, they were handing you every tool you would ever need to dismantle them. The database of truth, that notebook you carried, the one they mocked, the one they thought was filled with scribbled notes and simplistic reminders. It was no diary of ignorance. It was an arsenal. It was a vault. It was your database of truth. Inside, you weren't writing simplified summaries. No, you were creating a record more precise than any courtroom transcript. It was a comprehensive catalog of their contradictions, a mapping of their manipulations, a logbook of their lies, each one cross-referenced with the truth they thought you could never see. Every smirk was recorded, every harmless insult preserved, every eye roll at your supposed stupidity timestamped, every whispered joke behind your back etched into the pages like a dagger waiting to be unsheathed. What they thought was background noise became evidence. What they thought was a casual insult became a weapon in your arsenal. You weren't writing notes for survival. You were building a case for exposure, a prosecution biding its time in the shadows. And all the while, your invisibility grew stronger, because to them, you weren't a threat. You weren't even competition. They dismissed you. They erased you. They laughed in your presence and lowered their guard in your absence. They forgot you were even in the room. But invisibility, when wielded by someone with patience, is the most lethal weapon of all, because the predator you cannot see is always the one most likely to strike, and strike you would. The moment of revelation. And then, the day came. That inevitable day, that beautiful, terrifying, glorious day when you decided enough was enough. The air was heavy with routine. They expected the same performance from you, the stumbles, the hesitations, the questions. But this day was different. On this day, you stopped playing small. On this day, you refused to fumble over words you had always pronounced with perfect clarity. On this day, you lifted your eyes from the floor, and instead of nodding meekly, you met their gaze, steady, unwavering, sharp as a blade. The silence in the room shifted. Something unseen but undeniable filled the space, an energy they couldn't name but instinctively feared. And then, with perfect calm, you spoke, not as the fool, not as the background character, but as the genius you had always been. The shock was not a moment, it was a spectacle. Their mouths opened and closed, not in words but in gasps, like fish dragged onto dry land. Their faces contorted, eyes darting, brows furrowed, desperately trying to reconcile the image they had clung to with the reality now standing before them. It was almost comical, almost tragic, the way their worldview shattered in real time. Because in that single, unforgettable moment, the illusion died. They realized the truth with the force of a thunderclap. They had been the fools. They had been the marks. They had been the ones on stage performing, while you, the quiet observer, had been directing the entire play. They had shown you every card in their hand, believing you too blind to see. And you had seen it all. And the best part, you had receipts. Every insult they thought had faded into the air was written down, time-stamped, preserved. Every sneer, every backhanded remark, every harmless joke about your incompetence. It all lived in your archive. Every performance review questioning your ability. Every group chat where they laughed at your slowness. Every meeting where they spoke to you like a child. All of it was stored, undeniable, indestructible. And now, as you spoke with the clarity of 1,000 suns, they choked on their words. Their own arrogance had become the evidence against them. Their own cruelty had become the rope tightening around their throats. The revelation was not simply your brilliance. It was the undeniable proof that they had trained you, armed you, and exposed themselves to you, all while believing they were safe. Do you know the kind of discipline it takes to pull this off? To silence your brilliance day after day? To dim the radiance of your mind so that others, fragile in their pride, inflated in their illusions, could believe themselves superior? Imagine the restraint it required to swallow the corrections resting on the tip of your tongue, to bite back the truth that could have shattered their arrogance in an instant. You could have exposed their errors with a single sentence, dismantled their flimsy logic with a glance, yet you chose silence. And that silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. It was control. It was power wearing a mask. Every day was a performance. You were an actor living inside a script no one else could see, a script you authored with precision and foresight. To them, your hesitations looked genuine, your pauses seemed like confusion, your fumbles resembled clumsiness. But you knew every delay, every stumble, every moment of apparent ignorance was perfectly timed, perfectly placed. You orchestrated their perceptions with the mastery of a playwright who knows exactly how the audience will gasp, laugh, and sneer at each act. They believed they were seeing reality, but what they were watching was theater at its highest form. Do you understand the weight of such discipline? To play small in a world addicted to spectacle, to resist the instinct to rise and reveal the full scale of your brilliance. You had to carry yourself like a shadow walking among flames, dimming your glow so the insecure could bask in their counterfeit brightness. And yet, even in your smallest performance, your light still leaked through. Even when you were kneeling, some part of you towered above them. That's the paradox they never noticed. You couldn't hide your greatness completely. You could only disguise it as mediocrity. But make no mistake, it was exhausting, wasn't it? To pretend to trip when you could have soared, to ask questions you already knew the answers to let them laugh, to let them dismiss you, to let them whisper their condescension behind your back. They thought they were superior, but they were never your equals. They were props in your grand experiment. And you were the director disguised as the stagehand. You became fluent in two languages, the language of the fool and the language of the genius. A code switch so seamless it was almost divine. To your so-called threats, you spoke in fumbling tones, mispronounced words, feigned bewilderment. They smiled smugly, mistaking your restraint for stupidity. But to those rare souls you recognized as allies, you allowed the mask to slip just slightly. A sentence too sharp, an observation too profound, a flash of brilliance so undeniable it made them pause. You let them glimpse the truth, but only enough to keep the circle tight. The secret intact. It was a delicate balance. Show just enough competence to remain in the room, but not so much that you became a threat. Make just enough mistakes to be underestimated, but not enough to be discarded. Every move was measured, every word rehearsed, every silence calculated. You weren't stumbling through life. You were performing a choreography so intricate that even those who thought they were watching closely never realized they were being played. And the payoff was not ordinary. It was not something that could be measured in applause, trophies, or fleeting recognition. No, the payoff was divine, because while they lived in their illusions, you lived in truth. While they believed themselves to be ahead, you were always 3 steps further, unseen and unchallenged. Every moment of restraint was a seed planted in sacred soil. Every instance of feigned ignorance was an investment in your destiny. Every ounce of exhaustion became fuel for the day the mask would finally drop and the truth would stand unshaken. That day, the one you stand in now, was worth the weight of every silence, every disguise, every performance of smallness. Because now, when the veil lifts, the contrast is blinding. They cannot reconcile the image they had of you with the truth standing before them. The fool they mocked was the genius who orchestrated it all. The shadow they dismissed was the architect of light. The background character was, all along, the author of the story. And that revelation, that divine reversal, was always the reward you were walking toward. Now the mask is off, and the shift is permanent. Those who once spoke down to you now measure every word. Those who excluded you now scramble to include you. Those who mocked you now laugh nervously at your jokes, completely unsure if you have made them the punchline. You have become unpredictable in their eyes, and unpredictability terrifies people who thought they had you completely figured out. But here is the truth. They didn't change you. You didn't suddenly become brilliant. You didn't suddenly gain power. You have always been this person. The only thing that changed is their perception. The mask is gone, and now they're scrambling to rewrite history, to claim they always knew. You were brilliant to pretend they weren't the ones laughing the loudest at your expense. Let them. Their desperation is not your concern. The beginning, not the end. Understand this is not the end. This is just the beginning. Now that they know you are intelligent, they will try new tactics. They will test you, debate you, and challenge you. They will try to expose your limits, to prove you are not as powerful as you seem. Let them. Every test they design reveals more about them than it does about you. Every challenge is just another chance for you to show them you aren't even playing their game anymore. You're playing your own. You revealed enough to shift the game, but not everything. You showed them the tip of the iceberg, and they're still reeling from the shock. They haven't realized there's a mountain beneath the water. You're still holding back. You're still playing dumb, just at a higher level. So now, for the first time, you can truly breathe. You can stretch those intellectual muscles without fear. You can stop stumbling over words you could always pronounce. You can stop hiding behind confusion. You can stop pretending to be small. The freedom must feel intoxicating. This is who you have always been, not the mask, not the act, not the fool, the strategist, the seer, the genius who let the world believe otherwise until the time was right. And now the time is right. This is your unveiling. This is your becoming. This is the season where the world realizes what you always knew deep down. You were never underestimated by accident. You were underestimated by design. And in that underestimation, you built a power no one can take away. So stand firm. Keep building. Keep moving in silence. Keep playing the long game. Because the greatest revenge has never been loud. It has always been undeniable. If this message resonated with you, beloved soul, make sure you subscribe to Rise and Shine and join our growing community of awakened ones. Your time is now, and your light is needed.